So this presentation, like I said, securing your systems without being a white hat. That's really the key here is, in my experience, I've been several different environments where part of the consulting or the employment process is, hey, we need to secure these systems. We need to harden our systems. And it was intimidating the first couple of times that was on my to-do list, where that was a responsibility, where I was like, sweating a little bit, saying, wow, I'm going to be responsible for securing this thing. I don't know necessarily that I've got the background to do it, because I don't have that hacking background or whatever. However, once I started looking into it, and I've been through the ringer even on security, all the way through security audits and things like that, it is really not, all deference to the security specialists on that, but it's not as hard to get some basic security as you might think. Yes, there are people out there that really know their stuff and can do all kinds of cool things, but the sort of like the standard, the baseline, and your ability to do it without being a security specialist has definitely come up over the years, and that's really where I want to focus on for this particular presentation. So we'll start with just sort of a getting started. Hey, here's some things that if somebody throws it on your desk tomorrow and says, hey, we need you to secure this system, whatever it happens to be, here's some things to do. And a lot of it actually does come down to common sense. There's a lot of best practices out there. We'll talk about some security resources, and then how to just go from that baseline to something much stronger over time. So when you're getting started, somebody says, hey, we need to make sure our systems are secure. Or this may be yourself. You may say, I'm getting to a point where my personal side hustle kind of stuff needs to get locked down a little bit more. Maybe you get hacked. That usually is a good indicator that, all right, I've got to lock it down a little bit more. Maybe not, but it's maybe something where the visibility is coming up, or you have some customers or partners that do have sensitive data that you really, you want to get ahead of the game. Basically, you don't want to get to the point where people are asking you, hey, is it secure? And you say, no, not yet. You want to make sure that when they say, is a secure system, that you can say yes, and that you can feel comfortable with it too. It's one just to say, well, we do some basic stuff, and another one where you really feel like, okay, I have taken reasonable steps to lock this thing down. And of course, all of this, it should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways. There's no such thing as 100% secure. There's always ways to get in. If you can get into the system, if anybody can get in the system, then anybody could get into the system. It just depends on, how they go about it. So the first thing you want to do is really assess your environment. What is it that I'm trying to secure? What are particularly like the likely threats, and what are some of the access points? Is this a server that's locked down so that currently the only way you can get in is through from a specific IP address and with 3 levels of passwords or something like that? From a threats, is a little bit of it has to do with the data sensitivity. Are you dealing with something I call lightly sensitive, like maybe addresses and phone numbers? Is it something a little more sensitive? Maybe it's some specific kind of information that people could use for social engineering, like social security numbers, definitely, but even like birth dates, names of family members, the kinds of things that are sort of fall into those questions that may be security questions. Or, as you get into higher level sensitivity stuff that may be like financial account numbers, HIPAA, any health related stuff. I personally would rather have my health related stuff get out there than financial stuff. But I think if you look at the business world, the health related stuff is actually almost considered more sensitive than that. And then of course you can get into, things that are, security from a governmental point of view that are, top secret, or, that kind of stuff. So depending on what you're dealing with, is going to be sort of some of the threats that you may worry about. And then some of it comes to the size of the company. If it's just you and a little side hustle, and it's, bobstreats.com or something that's doing very little amount of business, you're probably not going to be on the radar. But if you're Microsoft or Oracle or something like that, you're definitely going to be on a radar. The U.S. government, SunTrust Bank, something like that. Those guys, if you're working for somebody like that, obviously you're going to be a threat. And it may not be just, we'll call them hackers hacking for hacking's sake. Could also be, you may be in a situation where there's some competitive hacking and things like that. The most famous of those probably would be the whole ongoing, Russia hacking systems in the U.S. and of course, U.S. hacking systems all over the place and China hacking systems all over the place. You get up to a global, a geopolitical scale. A lot of it's competitive hacking. It's, people trying to hack all the, other governments, whether friends or enemies, just to know as much as it can. So with that, you should be able to help figure out sort of what is a baseline security level needed. Is it something where you're okay saying, I can go out there, I can take the reasonable steps that anybody would take, and I'm going to feel pretty good about it? Or maybe I do need to go get some specialist to really help lock this thing down and put audit trails so that if something happens, we know sooner than later rather than later. And related to that is, what's the cost of a breach? Always take it to the worst case. What happens if this data gets out in the public? Does it, how does it affect me? It may not affect you very much at all. It may bring down a company. So that's all going to have to factor in to assessing the environment. And then there's some external modifiers in there as well. If you're like healthcare, you're going to have HIPAA requirements. If it's any kind of financial transactions, it's either, maybe Securities and Exchange Commission may have some stuff, or PCI compliance. You may have things like, Sarbanes-Oxley or some of these others that are out, or all of the different, standards that are out there, Six Sigma approach to stuff. I don't know. There's all kinds of stuff like that may factor in, including the boardroom, the management. You may have a company that really doesn't care and they don't put much stress on it. You probably want to educate them and say that they do need to put a little stress on it. But on the other side, you may have, you may be somewhere where the CEO is completely paranoid about that kind of stuff and really wants you to lock it down. So you may say it's not that sensitive of data, but maybe they say it is. A good example in the past, worked for a company that we did not really, technically we had zero personal health identifying kind of data. There was a possibility people could put PHI into the system. And because of that, and because we dealt with healthcare customers, we had to go through and say, okay, we're HIPAA compliant. It was a little bit sort of not quite a rubber stamp. I mean, we still had to do a lot of security steps that HIPAA compliance requires, but we did it based on our customers in that case. The rest of it, if you'd looked at everything else, we wouldn't have had to be near as secure as we were. So the first thing with security that is an amazingly good first step is just using your common sense. I've spent a couple months, the first part of this year, reviewing lots and lots of security awareness tools. Went through a lot of security awareness videos and training and stuff like that as part of assessing all of these. And a lot of it was just perfect common sense. It's the kind of stuff that you see it or you hear it and you read it and say, yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. But then when you start putting that out into the business world, it's amazing how often that's not adopted. And part of that, the simplest security for the users is always going to be the best. If they don't have to, the less work they have to do as part of the security, the better. Now, there's always going to be a trade-off, because at some point you're going to have things like they're going to have to change a password maybe every 30 days. They're going to have passwords that are not password 123. It's things like that. And they may have to log in 2 or 3 times to get to a specific system. But if you can, as much as possible, make that easy for them. And now there's things like the multi-factor authentication, where they can just grab an app from Google and just see the number pop up instead of carrying the little key fobs that went around for years, or everybody basically has got a phone, so it'll just text them. Take advantage of that kind of stuff. Make it more or less the stuff they already have with them. Yeah, they may have to answer an extra question or something like that, but that allows them to do it without too much impact to them, but also adds quite a bit of security to your system. Definitely where you can, try to avoid negative impact to the users. If they've got stuff where it's really overly complicated, then you're more likely to have them not do it. And I know there's a balance you have to strike there, because you're going to have, and that does go to security awareness, is helping your users, your customers, whoever it is that's involved on the security side, understand that this is helping them as much as it's helping anybody. It's like we're doing this for security reasons. Where you can, take advantage of standard tools. OAuth is great, because, and a lot of the essentially single sign-on is becoming almost ubiquitous. It's just, there's a lot of ways to just log in one time. You've got a really good password, and then you're off and running. There's also all these password vaults and managers and things like that, so that you enter one password and it can keep all kinds of nasty, incredible, you're never going to remember it kind of passwords stored. So take advantage of those kind of things. That will help your security, and it makes it easier on the users, from them and for you. If there's something, if you've got an access in that's pretty easy to remember, that probably means it's going to be pretty easy to hack. So, don't be afraid to use usernames that are not standard. Avoid things like root or admin or SA or something like that, or even with combinations of it. You could make it some long complicated name. Maybe it's like business name admin 6583 or something like that. Stuff that, it's not going to roll off the tongue, but it is going to make it harder for them to hack. And when in doubt, again, sort of common sense, but don't make yourself a target. Don't have stuff that's out in the public domain that makes it easy to, especially social engineer your company. So if you've got a lot of, for example, like a lot of, it's just like social networking sites in general. If you spend a lot of time bragging about what you're doing and everything in your life on Facebook or one of those kind of things, then everybody has access to that information. So they could know that, somebody could call and say, hey, we're from the credit card company. You were just at Disney World last week, and there's this extra charge. We just want to make sure that we can get that covered for you. Can you give me a credit card number? Stuff like that. The more information you give to hackers, the more they can use that to try to fool you or people in your company. And those are becoming more and more the most common hack, is that somebody calls in, finds out who the name of the CEO and their executive assistant. They call the executive assistant, run a little phishing scheme, basically spear phishing scheme, I guess, to be specific. And next thing you know, they've been able to, get a check, written out to them for hundreds of dollars, or they've got gift card numbers worth, hundreds or thousands of dollars. So just, keep things a little closer to the vest. Best practices. I'm going through these. We should all know these, but again, it just doesn't hurt to think about it when you're going through setting up security. Always avoid default passwords. If you install something new, it should just be habit that immediately after installation, you're going to go in, you're going to look at whatever the defaults are and change those. A lot of stuff now is getting so that it forces you right away right after you log in, or even part of the login or part of the install, to change passwords and secure things. But if not, make sure that you get it. In particular, hardware, routers and switches and stuff like that. There's a lot of them that have stuff that's default, and you just don't think about it. You plug it in, you hook some stuff up to it, and you're off and running. And you forget that somebody could actually get into that from the outside and could do some interesting things, because you're still sitting on the default admin and password. Likewise, where possible, it's really useful to use custom port numbers and logins. Like I said before, don't use root, admin, SA, words that have admin in it. Those kinds of things. Something that's hard to even guess the login. And then for ports, I mean, it's easy for us to throw something out that's on the default port 80 or 8080 or all the, it's like all these softwares are out there, especially databases. They all have their own defined port number. Yes, sometimes if you change it, you can cause yourself all kinds of headaches from a development point of view to make sure everything points to the proper port. In some cases, it may actually not be allowed. It may be that there's a framework you're using or something where the port is hard coded. But where you can, it's very helpful to switch to a different port. Port scanners may still pick them up, but it does help for just sort of the brute force attacks. You won't see, there's some of those that will automatically fail because they won't go to the right port number. Password security is huge. If you look, it's still one of the biggest problems is that people use passwords that are like password 123 or their name or something like that. The best way to do it, we're getting to a point where we all need to up our game as far as passwords are concerned. So it's probably better to use phrases. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these kinds of things in a slide or two from here, but use things that are not like a single name or a single item or something like that, or even a description, like blue car 21 or something like that. Don't use the year that whatever the year is, using that as a number, those kinds of things. Wherever possible, like I said, we've got electronic stores for stuff, so don't put stuff on Post-it notes, particularly if you're in an office that's not at like a home office, maybe, but definitely if you get away from your home office, you get out in the work world, don't have notes and stuff scribbled down on your desk or something like that. Don't have obvious hints. A great one that we did for this is for a grandparent, and we knew that it would be hard to remember what the password was for her. The obvious hint was we actually, when you clicked hint for the password, it said, specifically, this is what you enter for the password for this thing. So the hint was obviously an overly obvious hint. It's nice to be sort of vague with that. If you've got some sort of a scheme or a pattern that you use for passwords, it helps a lot. Where you can, like phrases, that's actually a nice one to use for hints, where you can hint at the phrase and maybe the how you mangled it up as part of it. Whether that has to do with mentioning, maybe particularly what pattern you use to alter upper and lowercase, or what kind of special characters may exist in it. Finally, with best practices from a security point of view, this is a huge one that came out of security awareness stuff and story after story that I've actually run into people where this is a problem. When in doubt, verify your sources. If you get a phone call, if you get an email, if you get a letter from somebody, double, triple check, is this a legit source? Is this who I think it's coming from? Even if it's their name. Like I said, you may have something that has the name of your CEO on it, but if you look deep enough, you find out that no, it was actually sent by some external email address. And it doesn't hurt, if you've got an order from the CEO to maybe just pick up the phone and say, hey, did you send this? Something like that can save you lots of embarrassment. So going a little bit further into passwords, just because we haven't beaten this dead horse enough, password keepers and vaults are awesome. That's just becoming so easy to use those that I highly recommend them, particularly because most of them will generate really nasty, long, 20-character long passwords, and they just store them, and you're off and going. Although a lot of stuff still has minimums of 5, 6, maybe 8-character passwords, you should definitely be into double digits and beyond at this point. I think we all just need to, like I said, step up our game a little bit. Make sure with any password that you're mixing cases, upper and lower cases. There's some numbers in there. Special characters. Wow, that's a completely bad typo there, but that meant to be throw in special characters, not through is. I have no idea what I was thinking there, but hey, there's a good comment. There's a good example of just totally mucking stuff up. That kind of stuff's going to help you with your passwords. The more you can do it, the more you can throw in things that are going to be harder for a system to guess, the better. And another key that's we probably need to be thinking more is make sure that we're regularly changing our passwords every 30, 45, 60 days, something like that. It's just it's just a really good habit to get into. It can be a little bit of a pain in the butt, but that being said, it really does help change stuff up. For example, I had a system that got hacked that I had a password and a username and a password in it. And I started getting spam mail for quite a while. One of these, things where we've got sensitive information that we'll release to people if you don't pay us through Bitcoin. And, it was easy for me to just say, don't care, one, because that sensitive information doesn't exist. And two, I've already, that password is a password from, years ago or something. I've, moved on from that long ago. Of course, if you do see something like, if you get hacked or anything like that, clear them out and immediately change all your passwords. And across systems, especially if you're somebody that uses the same password on multiple platforms, then you need to change all of those on a regular basis. So security resources, as I said at the start, this really is not as scary as one would think. Once you start getting into it, once you've assessed your environment and you know what are the players in the environment, what are the things that I'm using, what's my operating system, what's my database, what's my programming language, you can go out in a lot of these cases to vendor sites and see some really good information on securing or hardening that system. You can also go search like the product name, like Oracle. How do I harden Oracle systems? And you're going to see all kinds of tutorials and training and things like that out there. There's all sorts of good information that is, again, it's that common sense kind of stuff. But if you haven't done it before, you're not going to think of it. So it's the kind of stuff that makes sense after the fact, but you may not think about it beforehand. OWASP, if I can switch over, I do want to flip that up as part of this one, because it is OWASP.org is an open source security. It's the OWASP Foundation. And it is just a gold mine of security related stuff. If you go there, you can see here off to the left that there's all sorts of, they talk about governance. They've got they've got mailing lists you can get on, presentations. They've got all kinds of reference stuff based on some different languages, as far as development languages, different databases. You can jump into, they've got projects much like, you think about like Apache or somebody like that. They've got all sorts of projects that are tools and documentation to help secure your systems. It's just amazing how many times I've gone out and done some searches for security and hardening systems and basically been able to just walk through, like something from OWASP, like the OWASP top 10. If I can click on it right. Let's see, where did it go? So this is the 2017. Let me see if it'll open up. And things like this, they've got all kinds of these flyers. So this is the top 10 things to worry about as far as web applications are concerned. And they just walk through them, and they'll basically say, this is what it is. This is what you can run into. And here we go. And here's some resources to address them. So websites, a lot of these you've probably heard of, but these are, in the top 10 things that are things you need to worry about. Code injection, broken authentication, sensitive data exposure, external entities, broken access control, security misconfiguration. This is one that, from the start, this happens a lot. This is where install it, read the manuals, look at the best practices to make sure you take care of it. Cross-site scripting, insecurity serialization, using components with known vulnerabilities, which is basically make sure everything's up to date and patched, and insufficient logging and monitoring, which is another one that I haven't mentioned yet. But once you get these systems set up, you really need to be able to monitor them to make sure that they are solid. And if you get breached, that so you can take the appropriate steps to fix things. So OWASP is a huge resource. I highly recommend, as I do now, that's where I start. Basically, if I'm asked to harden a system, I'm going to go look there first and poke around for the type of application, because they've got stuff for web, for mobile, for databases, and then where I can find some vendor specific stuff, because it is very valuable and it can get you well on your way to securing your system within, like, I hate to say minutes, but basically within minutes. I mean, I can sit down with that sometimes, and within an hour, I've got a system that I'm pretty comfortable with, that I've got it secured. And maybe I've got to do some installs or something like that. But as far as just general configuration, setting up passwords a certain way, setting default values to certain ways, that's going to get you well on your way to feeling like, okay, I've got a secure system. Incremental improvements. This is now, let's assume that we've gotten something put together. We have a baseline. We've locked down some stuff. We've done some basic best practices. When in doubt, the best way you can start out with stuff is to lock everything down everywhere that you can find it. Limit access by IP addresses and port numbers, and make sure that you don't have any. You can get rid of default users and users that don't need to have access to the system. Any kind of group login or password. Get all that stuff cleaned up. Lock everything down. Bring up a firewall that has like no access. From there, you basically get it so that you have basically it's sort of like an MVP of security, is get it so that, open things up then so that you have the access that you think you absolutely need for stuff to run. And then as time goes on, you can look at ways that, maybe you open things up a little bit more, but you're comfortable with the security that you have, so that even if you've opened it up to maybe a little more opportunity for being hacked, you're more secure that the system is not going to be hacked because of, things like maybe other internal firewalls or port numbers that aren't standard, and, passwords that make a lot of sense. Logging and auditing kind of controls. So, and especially automation and warning, so that if somebody does get in and is doing something that's a little bit, looks a little suspicious, then, well, you can take care of that you can go in there and, make it secure again, kick them out, lock them out, whitelist, blacklist them, whatever you need to do. Those kinds of things, it's time consuming, but it's like everything else. It's worth it to spend some time on a regular basis, just like I've talked about in the past. Have some time every week to devote to learning and improving your career and teaching yourself the latest technologies. Security is the same way. You should have regular, depending on how your systems are, weekly, maybe just monthly or quarterly, things that you do where you just sort of review your systems, review your logs, make sure that there's nothing in there that snuck by, and address it if you need to. Automation is going to help so much. The more that you can automate connections between your systems, security up and down. Some places it's as good as, sometimes there's opportunities to actually have firewalls that open only for a window of time where maybe you're doing some sort of an external file share or something, like you're FTPing something up or down, hopefully SCPing something up and down, or some sort of a sync to another system, that you're doing it on an automated basis. And at 2 a.m. every day, you're going to run this synchronization. It's going to be done by 3 a.m. And so you can just say, all right, I've got something that opens that firewall to that machine for that hour, and then it slams the door on it again. Those kinds of things are, they're definitely not something you're going to be able to think about doing or probably have the time to do early on, but it's worth it. Again, if you throw a couple hours on a regular basis to the securing the systems tasks, over time, you can build up a nice little list of automations and things that you want to do, in those couple of hours, and it'll add up. And eventually you should have hopefully a nice, really secure system. Of course, along with that, you want to make sure that you are, doing all your latest patches and all the security updates and things like that. So that there's going to be part of that time that's just going to be the general maintenance and administration. Hopefully you set something up in a way that you can make some improvements as well. Scanning tools and reviewing logs are just they're getting to a point where they are pretty mindless as far as you point the tool at your machine and it's going to start throwing some stuff out to you. Say, hey, here's some vulnerabilities we found, or here's some issues. Sometimes they'll even scan logs and things like that. So they'll point out, hey, you've got this access from this IP address that does not seem to make sense. Or you've got this login on a user that user should not be able to log in. Perfect example I ran into not too long ago is we had I was had a customer where we were running Jenkins, and Jenkins has got some notoriously bad holes in the older versions of it. There was a Jenkins user. Nobody ever should log in as the Jenkins user. It was just the way the tool was set up. It was just, internally for security for those related files. And we had something, we had a login from the Jenkins user. We had a couple of tasks that had been created by the Jenkins user. It's like, wait a minute, that shouldn't happen. So those kinds of things, those were some of the first clues that, hey, we've been hacked, and we were able to shut that stuff down and, patch it and things like that. And so, the moral of the story, it was a happy ending. We were able to update everything and secure our systems again, but those kinds of things are going to show up in the logs and some of these scanning tools. They will find common exploits and they will point out to you, hey, this thing is happening, which seems to be a common exploit. If it's a false flag, that's okay. At least you know that, hey, that's something we do. We're special. We look like we're hacking our systems, but we're not. But if not, it's a good red flag for you to go start doing some searching and say, hey, have we been hacked? And if so, try to figure out where it came in, try to block the hole, change the passwords, all of that good stuff. Just to reiterate, update you even on, I know people traditionally just use antivirus on Windows machines and everything else is fine, but wherever you have the opportunity to use antivirus, you should have it. Make sure it's up to date. Make sure that it's pointing to the systems that you normally use, whether it's something that runs on top of the browser, whether it's, you're getting email on that machine, and so maybe do some email scanning. Because even if, for example, let's say you're a Mac machine and you get some email sent to you that has an exe in it that really, would do nothing for you on a Mac machine. Just the fact that you got that email in, maybe something that's worthwhile warning other people that you work with that, hey, I got this little, spam thing that was a maybe potentially hacking attempt. I just want to make sure everybody else knows about it. There may be some information in that email that you find out that, hey, there's been some social engineering done. Maybe somebody knows more about our systems or our company than we want them to. There's a lot of things like that you want to be aware, even if it's not something you're going to be particularly vulnerable to, the guy or girl next to you might be. Patching your systems is easy to forget, particularly side hustle kind of stuff. I've found that it's really easy for time to fly by, and I look in and realize that my system did not get updated, hasn't been updated in a long time. Make sure that it's something like everything else. You should, like I said, have maybe regularly scheduled reviews of your systems, bring them up to date. Besides security, it may be a huge performance thing. The developer site's a good example, as that was put into place several years ago now. It was running on an old version of PHP that was, moderately secure, but definitely not as fast as the modern one. Went through, did the updates, brought everything up to date, and it was comparatively screaming fast. I mean, it went from, in some cases, the stuff I was doing was taking, 30 seconds to load a page, and it got back down to like 3 seconds to load a page. So there's a lot of benefits outside of security of taking some of these steps as well. It's just it's simple things like clearing out services or processes that aren't needed. Those could be security risks, but also, they're just draining resources that you don't need to have. So these kinds of things are going to help you not only be secure, but have a better, faster running system that, smells good and is easy on the eyes, all that good stuff. Assessments. I think in my professional career, one of the scariest moments beyond the first couple of years was when somebody said, "Hey, we're going to do a security audit on your system," and it was a system that I was responsible for. Um, it seems much more. I think it probably seems much more intimidating than it is. Once you go through one, you'll find that it's like everything else. It's very helpful. Yes, it's going to find, they're going to find holes. That's just, they're going to find things for you to do. But the nice thing is that's part of the assessment. You're going to get a list of things to do. So you take that checklist and just start cranking through it, start cleaning stuff up. It's actually very informative. I would love for any system now to be able to go through an audit or an assessment before I do the actual securing of the system, because it's just going to help me quite a bit. Just unfortunately, they tend to be pretty expensive, in the couple $1,000 ranges. So it's not something that, from a financial point of view, probably you're going to be able to do on a regular basis. However, if you are in a situation where an audit or security assessment is coming up, where possible, see if you can get the checklist or this, so the outline of what they do. A lot of times that's beforehand, because a lot of times what that's going to do is help you focus on what you should look into. The more that you can secure your system before an audit or an assessment, the more useful that assessment's going to be. Because if you can secure a lot of the baseline stuff, then there's going to be essentially there's going to be more advanced kind of security holes they're more likely to report. Because there's, it's like everything else. If they're just getting slammed with all of these very low level, low hanging fruit kind of security issues, then they're going to fill that report up really quick. And they may not be in a situation even to hit some of the more senior level, advanced level kind of security checks, because it's such a mess at the most basic level. So the more you can secure it beforehand, the better. If you can get their checklist, then you're going to have some areas that you can go look at. You're going to be able to see, oh, we've got to check to make sure these things are up to date. Let's make sure that these ports are secure, that these users have been disabled, and these settings have been set, all that kind of stuff. Once you get it, you're also going to know, this goes back to really that first step of assessing your environment. While you're going out and looking at this stuff, see if there are any issues reported with whatever version or the latest versions of that stuff. Go see if there are known issues for, let's say you're running Java. Let's say you're running Java 8 on Tomcat. Go do some Googling to see, for security issues on on Tomcat Java 8. And if you see some, then hopefully there's going to be remediation so that you can go in and make the changes you need to and secure that kind of stuff, so that because that's stuff that the security people are going to look at probably right away. They're looking for those things. They're going to try to help you out. If you're already ahead of the game, then it's that much better. When you if you're somebody that's communicating with the auditors or the assessors from a security point of view, do your best to get every detail you can about your systems. What are the systems you have? What are all the ways that they could be accessed? All of that kind of stuff. The more that you can give them, the better picture you give them of your systems, the better they're going to be able to try to do the penetration testing and assess all of those access points and give you, a thorough report. Take advantage of it. Don't be afraid of the assessment or the audit. Look at it as an opportunity for you to correct your systems. And then once you get it back, review it carefully. It essentially is a checklist of things that you need to do to secure your system. So walk through it bullet point by bullet point, item by item, and make sure that you understand what they've assessed, what they ask you to do, or what the remediation is, and then follow it up. Do so. Take advantage of that thing. Like I said, they're not cheap, so you definitely want to take advantage of this and use those resources wisely. Take advantage of that money and time that was spent. Also, don't be afraid to do some searches on the results, ask questions. Sometimes you'll get an audit that will be presented and they'll actually walk through things. Sometimes it's more of a report and they just leave it to you to ask them questions. Take advantage of that. Feel free to make sure it's clear. Ask them, how do I do this? Or where does this come from? Or where can I find more information about this? And I don't know any case where they're not going to help you out. they want to help you. So they're going to, point you to whatever resources they can. They may ask for some additional consulting hours or something like that. So you may have to figure it out. But normally, as part of assessment, they're at least going to include some time for discussion of what they found and presenting it in a way that you can get some action items out of it. So wrapping this one up at this point, essentially, is it all starts with securing systems does not require you to have some sort of certificate or spend years in security training and hacking schools and stuff like that. It's really easier than I think we think. The goal is just make it a challenge. Like I said, you're not going to be 100% secure, but if you take the reasonable steps, that means it's going to be something that hackers are not going to just be able to like stumble into. And when you look at the universe of hackers, there's a lot of them out there that are just kids that aren't really, they're sort of like randomly trying to do stuff. It's not that big a deal. They're just, if they look into something, then they may do something damaging. If you can raise the bar so that the only people who are going to get into your systems are ones that have to put some effort into it, that may detour almost a huge portion of the hackers because they're not looking to really spend a lot of time and effort on it, particularly if whatever the prize of hacking your system is essentially nothing other than just they can say they hacked it, then they're probably going to move on. So if you make it a challenge, it's just going to make it that much harder for them and that much less likely that you get hacked. Perfect example, if you've got an iPhone or something like that where you've got a screen lock on it, the likelihood that it's going to get stolen drops crazily amount because people are like, I just don't want to deal with it. If the screen's locked, then it's not worth it to me. So there's some things like that just taking those simple steps may deter hackers. Avoid advertising stuff of we've got these great systems or this is what we use. Those kind of things may be nice for your customers, but also that means the hackers know sort of some places to go, where there are going to be some likely exploits. If they know what your database vendor is, what your application server vendor is, what your primary switching or firewall vendor is, those are all things that they could use if they want to go find out what are the standard vulnerabilities of those systems, and that's the first place they're going to go. Which, that flip side of that is if you know what those standard vulnerabilities are and have addressed them, then you're going to block those. It's rare, but I think you definitely don't want to be in a situation where somehow that the information you provide is essentially taunting hackers. We dare you to hack this system kind of stuff. Obviously is going to have people try to hack your system. If you want to be one of these, I can't remember, there's some that have famously offered money for hacking. If somebody can hack the system or, can find a way to break through their security, that's awesome if you want to make sure that you are super secure. But also that means that you are going to be, that attempt's going to be made. So I prefer not being made a target. Take advantage of resources out there. There is so much out there as far as training and tutorials and free stuff out on the web that are tools and checklists and best practices. Take advantage of that stuff. It doesn't make sense to try to go it alone, to try to build your own security system when there are people behind you. They've already done this that really know their stuff and understand the systems and the hacker mentality, and can help you really get a good start on it as opposed to having to build it from scratch. That being said, open up for questions and comments.
So just to kind of nail down your point about the viruses, Mac actually now has 3 new viruses that have actually popped up in the past few weeks that are attacking Macs.
Yeah, I think it's sort of common sense that as Macs and even Linux desktops started gaining a little more hold, that there were going to be, and particularly when people said, yep, you don't have to worry about antivirus for those, that there were going to be people that were going to find ways to put viruses in them. And honestly, things like mail, the mail clients being as smart as they are now, where you can squeeze it. They will run sometimes JavaScript or some HTML or just some links that are basically phishing stuff. You can't be too secure, basically. Just take advantage of these kinds of things because it is out there. Other questions, comments?
Yeah, has security pretty much taken over in the IT industry? Because lately, most companies are emphasizing security, but before I kind of feel like it was kind of a backbencher, like maybe people thought systems were more secure than before. Because all the time I'm here, we're looking for security compliance here. For instance, like we might be doing something at work and we stop it because we think there is a PCI requirement that we might be missing, and they stop transactions or something like that. Has security pretty much taken over now?
I don't know if it's taken over, but it definitely is on a lot of radars, particularly because nobody wants to be the next people in the headlines that says that, hey, there was a breach of your system. We have seen in the last couple of years, we've seen some very big retailers and other companies that have been hacked. And people realize there's a cost to that. There are customers that may go away. There is stuff if something gets stolen or money is lost or anything like that. There's a financial burden. The PR hit is huge, and security organizations are taking advantage of this, and they're pointing this out. They're saying, hey, you guys are in an industry, whatever that industry happens to be, that because all of them are, you're an industry that needs to worry about security. You need to worry about customers feeling comfortable. More companies are going to online transactions and systems and automation that could be hacked, that is vulnerable to that. And so, it's starting to become, I think, if it's not necessarily taking over, I think it's definitely becoming standard. I think it's becoming like everything else. IT and automation is part of everybody's business anymore. Personally, that's some of the business that's come up for me. A lot of it in the last few years has been stuff that probably wouldn't have existed 5 or 10 years ago. And it's the idea of an IT audit, and even security audits are the same way. If you go back 5 or 10 years ago, everybody did financial audits, or at least, small, medium, definitely larger size companies. They did annual financial audits. People are realizing now that, hey, IT runs our company, so we need to do IT audits. Because we interact with the world, we need to do security audits. And that's, for some companies, that's part of doing business. If they're PCI compliant or HIPAA compliant, they do regular audits. And so it definitely is becoming a major portion of what companies do. It's part of doing business anymore. A question from Timothy is basically wanted to know that, I'll just sort of read it here. So are any particular technologies that that are to be relatively secure, or technologies that are by their nature secure, or I would think, insecure? And particularly, like he threw out like the idea of maybe REST versus SOAP, LDAP versus username password authentication, keys and tokens versus per transactional authentication. There are definitely technologies that are by their nature more secure. A good example that has been a challenge for me, Java versus PHP. If you look at, and I sort of like put Java and C#.NET, or actually the .NET technologies versus maybe a PHP or Python and some of these other things that are out there. Basically because some technologies were built with the idea of being an internet, something that's running in a network-enabled environment, like .NET and Java. So they have had a lot of stuff built into them to keep them secure, to make it easier to secure them. The integrations with some of the frameworks and the libraries that are common include security built into them, because that's just the nature of the beast. The people building it knew we have to secure our systems. That being said, that doesn't mean that necessarily that system is going to be more secure than something else. There are definitely, like I said, PHP is something that if you go to the older versions of it, they had a lot of issues with the ability to do SQL injection, stuff like that. They have made some good progress. So it's the kind of stuff where you want to make sure that you're using, where possible, the latest versions and using the latest best practices. When you talk about communication styles, I think it's sort of, to me, sort of intuitive or obvious that the communication stuff that forces a refresh of security more often, like if you've got token-based communication where you're sharing a token and every time you send the communication, you're essentially refreshing the token, that's going to be more secure than something that has a token that lives for an hour or a day or a week. I think I don't personally know enough about like the difference between SOAP versus REST and securing them. I think the way they're typically implemented, that you are going to see some are more secure than others not by default, but just the way they're typically used, I think is probably the better way to look at it, as opposed to being able to secure them. Because whether you use you can screw up posting versus just a nice little URL address, just practically just as easy, and you can secure things using like the cross-site CSRF IDs and tokens and things like that. So you can use things that now are pretty standard, really, to secure some of these systems that maybe by default they weren't. Again, this goes back to I really hang it a little bit on the developers to use best practices and understand what are the exploits for their system, and make sure that they code it properly, that they are taking those steps. And if you are in that kind of an environment, I highly recommend that that's one of the things you do early on. Like if you're going to build an API and you say, okay, I'm going to build a SOAP API, I think one of the things you should do as part of starting that off is go look at maybe common SOAP exploits or security issues or concerns, or security best practices for SOAP APIs, something like that. It sounds like a very, a crazy specific search, but do it in Google. Not there's probably some others that are good, but not to pick on the other one, but I'm going to pick on the other search engines. You go like Bing or something like that. Google is, from a technical point of view, I cannot say enough good stuff about Google searches, about getting you really good technical information. If I do the same thing on like Bing, for example, inevitably I'm not going to near as technical enough of results until I get deep into the pages. So I would say do a Google search on it. I guess a free ad for Google, but go do a search on them. You're going to see some training, you're going to see tutorials, you're going to see some examples, and probably even like one of these top 10 lists, top 10 things you should do if you're building a SOAP API to make sure that it's secure. I highly recommend doing that. So the answer is there is no long story short on that. It's a long answer. But again, if you start with assessing the system that you're working with, then take a look at it and do that early on, and you're going to see here's some steps to take. If you're trying to compare the two, then do it for both of those systems. You're probably going to see, in a lot of cases, you're going to see that it's 6 one, half dozen the other. It's different steps, but the same types of steps. But there are some cases where you're going to realize that one is going to take more. There are more steps or more complicated steps to secure it than the other. So it really comes down to a case-by-case basis for that. Any other questions, comments? All right, hearing none, then bottom line. So what have we learned? What is it that we should have learned walking away from this presentation? Security is it's probably scarier than it should be. It is actually very easy to embrace. There's a lot of stuff that if you spend a little time, you can set yourself up with some really good habits. And the next thing you know, you're writing some pretty darn secure systems. Go out there and look for the best practices, recommendations, and those are a great way to get going. Once you have those in mind, like I said, it's pretty easy to start creating habits with them and securing your systems. Patience and communication are key. It takes a little bit of work. It's going to take time to really secure something. From a user point of view, they're going to have to be a little patient because they may have to enter an extra password or enter an extra, if it's multi-factor authentication, then they're going to have to wait until the little text pops up on their phone or something like that. But it's worth it. And when in doubt, you need to make sure you're communicating this to the end users. Help people understand, coworkers, whoever it is, be sort of an advocate for security and say, hey, look, yep, it takes another second to load HTTPS versus HTTP, or yes, it takes a little time to, go enter this extra code, but it is a huge increase in our ability to secure our systems because now hackers, with multi-factor authentication, that's a perfect example of, yes, they can guess your password, but if you use MFA, then they have to be able to guess that password basically and be able to access it within that period of time to know what that access token is. So those kinds of things, suddenly it goes from they pretty much have any time that they can access this to now they've got to access it and have another layer of security that they've got to breach and be able to do so that in a way that only has windows of time for them to be able to figure it out, and then they have to start all over again. The bottom line, just don't take shortcuts. If you go in and do the things you're supposed to, follow the best practices, read the documentation, take the steps to say, ask yourself what I need to do to make this reasonably secure, and then go search that out and follow those steps, then you're probably going to have a secure system. If you don't cut corners, then you're going to be able to be comfortable with your system, and hackers count on people cutting corners, basically. Last but not least, thank you. I understand that sometimes this stuff can get a little bit long and dry, but appreciate your time. As always, discussion is welcome, whether it's through email, whether it's Facebook. Email us, info@developaneur.com. Contact us on the website. Twitter @developaneur. Actually, that's another one that on a regular basis, part of the series of tweets that go out on the Developaneur Twitter stream are this probably security stuff is probably every third or fourth tweet, which is probably every day or two you're going to see something that's security related, because that just happens to be, as pointed to from David's question, actually, is security is a hot topic. And like I said, it's not as complicated as it needs to be. And that's where a lot of those articles are that we tweet about. And of course, we actually still are old school and have a Facebook page out there on Developaneur. And actually, that's usually if there's a really good security article that may actually pop up on Facebook as well. Just trying to make everybody better, including ourselves. So go out there and